Greetings, dear listener. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new scary stories and support me with a like. Enjoy listening.
Worked overnight as a master control operator in my youth. One night, around 3 a.m., I catch sight of the camera we have aimed at the back door, and there's someone standing there wearing a scream mask staring at the camera and not moving. I go to the back door, which is magnetically sealed and deadbolt-ed for overnight. The door is next to impossible to force open, and look out the peephole, and there's no one there. Head back to control and see them walk back into frame, wave at the camera, and then walk away. Called the cops. They found nothing, and the camera doesn't record. It's live feed only. Spent a summer doing conservation work out in the absolute middle of nowhere in Wyoming. Was part of a crew that would spend 2 weeks camping in remote places to do manual labor in places machines couldn't get to. For this story, we were building new biking trails in the back portion of a designated wilderness area in a high-altitude desert. This means that the nearest civilization was a 2-hour car ride to a town of 41 people in a sandy soil area where tracks last forever. It was the middle of our stint during the early part of the night where everyone else had gone to bed, but I stayed up to read, so maybe 11:30 or so. Still pitch black outside, clouds had covered stars, so my headlamp was probably the only light on in a 40-mile radius. Suddenly I hear footsteps walking around our camp and head towards the tents from where I was in the community tent. That sound immediately put me on edge as I felt the hair on my arms raise and my adrenaline spike. I recall thinking to myself that two things are very wrong since the person was not using a light to see and the footsteps were not coming towards me from the tents. Rather, it was the opposite. Within the 4 seconds it took me to drop my book, get up, and turn the corner of the tent to cast my light on the sleeping tents. The sound had stopped, but I saw tracks in dirt before me. Looked like they came from one end of camp. Looked into my tent, walked through the sleeping tents, and kept going out of camp again. I don't know if I was making too much noise or not by walking around, but the rest of my crew ended up waking up and asking me what was going on from inside their tents. After explaining what I found, they all got up to look at the boot prints in the dirt. They were damn near perfect copies of my own boots except for one small thing. I had a rock stuck in my treads that messed up the symmetry. I was wearing fairly common work boots, except I also happened to wear US size 15 double-wide boots, so there was no way in hell this was one of the other crew members. I don't think any of us slept much that night. Never saw or heard anything more after that night. A light rain removed the tracks a couple days later, but I do remember none of us were willing to step on the prints themselves and choose to step over them like cracks in the sidewalk. I work on a ranch off of a quite dirt road. Our distant neighbors, nearest house is about 1 mile away as the crow flies, have had issues with people stealing things out of their outbuildings and storage sheds in the area. It was also late in the year, so it was starting to get dark around 6 p.m. So as a result, every time I would see headlights go down our road, I would watch to make sure they weren't stopping on the property. One evening, I see a vehicle going very slowly down the road and come to a stop at the end of our driveway, about 120 yards from our front porch. The vehicle is parked right in front of a 60s pickup I have parked, so I think whoever it is might be looking to steal it or just looking over the property. Whatever the case, I decide to put on a black coat and grab my rifle to go investigate. It's dark out, so I stay out of the headlights of the vehicle so I can get close. I can tell it is a white van, but I don't see anything else distinguishing about the van. When I'm about 50 yards away, the van backs up and turns into our driveway. I freeze as the headlights wash across me standing in the middle of my driveway, and I see the reflective FedEx logos on the side of the van. Needless to say, the FedEx driver probably shit his pants as he suddenly sees a dark figure standing in the middle of a field, in the dark, holding a rifle. Surprisingly, after I try to give a friendly wave and smile, he continues up the driveway to the house, and I get to explain the situation and we both have a laugh. So that's how I got to be the creepy guy in some FedEx delivery driver's story, working on ships. There was one night I was on a ship sailing through Alaskan waters, and it happened to be my first night ever seeing northern lights. I can't believe how awesome that was. It made the sky clear, made the night look like it was dusk. We were able to see clearly for miles. Few buddies and I hit the roof, or what we call Lido deck, at 1 a.m. just to gaze at it. An hour or so in, there was 6 of us on top, nearly the entire crew now. A big white spotlight shines at us. We were near land, but where the spotlight was above the water, and it wasn't low enough to be on a ship. This was very high up. It shined on us for about 15, 20 seconds. Once the light turned off, we looked to see what it was. Saw nothing. No trace of an aircraft or anything. Couple minutes go by and the same light shined on us. This time it was on the other side of our vessel, above mountains. Still, unable to see what it was. We all saw it. We all have never seen any aircrafts hovering above these waters, especially at 2 a.m. We don't know what it was. We think it might have been some sort of silenced aircraft the military was probably doing drills or something. But anyways, that was one of the weirder things to happen out on the ocean. I worked as an assistant in a morgue. As a med student, I got to open and study the bodies that people donated to the university. All the bodies were stored in a giant walk-in freezer. Also, the morgue had a motion sensor system inside the freezer, so if you get stuck inside, an alarm would activate and someone would come to help you. One time I was working alone because my teacher was doing some paperwork in his office that was in an adjacent building. I heard a lot of noise, but I thought it was my teacher in the other building or something like that, when suddenly the F*** King alarm goes off, scaring the SH** out of me. In that moment, I was like, *T, the teacher is stuck inside the freezer. And when I was running to the freezer, my teacher grabbed my arm and told me, I thought you were inside the freezer. In that moment, we stayed there staring at the door until he stopped the alarm and opened the door. I was behind him with a F*** King broom, waiting for the worst. When he opened the freezer, we didn't find anything that could activate the motion sensor. There wasn't anybody, at least not alive. We decided that it was enough for the day and we left the morgue early. My parents live pretty far back in the country and have one neighboring house. The neighbors would let their basset hound outside for about 10 minutes to use the bathroom every morning. One morning they let him out and he didn't come back inside. After a couple minutes they walked out to his favorite bathroom spot and found his head. Judging from the tracks, a mountain lion had ambushed him and apparently torn his head off before carrying the body away. What I thought was the creepiest part was that the family hadn't heard a sound. I used to do salmon spawning surveys, which involved walking up streams looking for fish. Some of the streams are quite remote and/or inaccessible on timberland, and you don't really expect to see any other person when you're out there. As a naturally smile-y, friendly, small, feminine woman, I've learned to be wary of people 100% of the time in the field. I actively try to avoid running into people when I'm alone in remote places. One of the survey locations is close to a highway. To get to it, I had to park at a pullout, follow a river downstream to a flagged trail, hike over a ridge to meet up with an old logging road on private timberland. I walked along the logging road for about 100 m before peeling off into the woods. Very thick second-growth Douglas fir reprod, where game trails eventually lead to the stream at the base of the hill slope. I came here during spring to survey steelhead, but this stream was also a survey location for other types of salmon during the fall. The game trails off of the logging road were flagged by previous surveyors, and multiple routes were marked. This made it kind of confusing, and not all routes actually led to the stream. Some just petered out once the vegetation got too thick. Another led to a cliff face overlooking the riverbed. Lots of faint trails. One day I turned off into the woods, one of the survey flags tied around a branch at the side of the road. I followed some pink flagging heading south along the hillside. I noticed the trail seemed freshly turned up, and figured maybe a bear clambered through recently since the time I was there last, 2 weeks previously. The trail led to a small claustrophobic clearing, and the ground was freshly torn up in the shape of a circle. Seemed strange. I was looking for elk tracks but didn't see any. Then I noticed an assortment of bones scattered around the edges of the clearing. These weren't there before. Everything was dead silent, and something about it was setting me on edge. I poked around the bones a bit, trying to piece together this scene. I noticed another slight path, which strayed from my main route, veering to the right from the clearing. I walked a bit down that way and gazed ahead, trying to see if this path was flagged. It was densely packed with trees. A subtle movement caught the corner of my eye ahead and to the right as I walked. I turned my head to look past the trees and saw the silhouette of a large shelter maybe about 50, 75 feet from the clearing. It was surrounded by what looked to be jugs and bones, tons of plastic jugs, light shapes of bones on the ground. The lighting made seeing anything else impossible. Everything was so quiet. I left in a hurry, off the trail, without trying to get a better look, without getting to the stream. The alarm bells in my brain were screaming. Edit. I don't know if the movement I saw was just a trick of the eye or if there was actually something moving. My gut feeling was someone was present at the shelter when I was there. Another clarification, the jugs were large. For example, not plastic milk jugs. More like chemical containers. It wasn't random trash strewn around the shelter. It was jugs and lots of bones. I worked as an assistant in a morgue. As a med student, I got to open and study the bodies that people donated to the university. All the bodies were stored in a giant walk-in freezer. Also, the morgue had a motion sensor system inside the freezer, so if you get stuck inside, an alarm would activate and someone would come to help you. One time I was working alone because my teacher was doing some paperwork in his office that was in an adjacent building. I heard a lot of noise, but I thought it was my teacher in the other building or something like that. When suddenly, the F*C King alarm goes off, scaring the SH*T out of me. In that moment, I was like, *TT, the teacher is stuck inside the freezer. And when I was running to the freezer, my teacher grabbed my arm and told me, "I thought you were inside the freezer." In that moment, we stayed there staring at the door until he stopped the alarm and opened the door. I was behind him with a F*C King broom waiting for the worst. When he opened the freezer, we didn't find anything that could activate the motion sensor. There wasn't anybody, at least not alive. We decided that it was enough for the day and we left the morgue early. Used to be a night janitor in a movie theater. We would go in at 4 a.m. and clean until the doors opened at 11 a.m. To save time and our jobs, we would sometimes come in around the time the last movies were finishing and just sleep in one of the empty theaters, making sure we would be there when the shift started. Our basic MO was to use electric leaf blowers up and down the aisles of each theater, blowing popcorn and trash all the way to the bottom, then cleaning the seats up manually for anything gross or larger debris. This was expedient, but it was very loud, so it was easy to lose yourself in the work. Of course, the lights were on in the theaters to better assist in the cleaning, and usually we were the only ones there at the time. So whenever something strange happened, we would chalk it up to the other guy. There was one standing rule, though, that we all followed to the letter. No one in the projection booth. There was no reason to go up there. We didn't clean it. All our supplies were downstairs, and most of all, it was haunted. There is a phenomenon that happens with theaters and projection booths. No matter what, you always feel like you're being watched. When you're walking around deaf from the sound of the blowers in an empty movie theater, and you happen to glance up at the booth, and there is unmistakably someone standing there watching you, you will ** to your pants. Especially when you go out into the hallway and find the other guy in his theater working. especially when you both go to either end of the building to the two exits of the booth and trap whoever it was up there and there is no one there. We just chose not to with it. I was working in the villages of Malawi, Africa, and came to one community very isolated and remote. The children stopped going to school because these guys were terrorizing them. They were witch doctors, and if caught, they'd take the kids into the cemetery and do crazy things. They also terrorized the widows and others in the community. When they told me the story, I thought they might be exaggerating a bit. I didn't ever feel scared when I was in the villages, and since they are cut off from technology, I thought maybe it was just a bit of folklore passed away to create fear. Then one day I was sitting on a banana fibers mat with a widow and drinking tea. I couldn't speak the tribal language, so we just smiled and drank together in silence and peace. All of a sudden I heard like this grunting sound. An electric bolt of fear crept down my body. I can't even explain how intense this fear was. It's like I just froze and couldn't even turn around. I just felt evil and darkness around me. Anyway, these witch doctors surrounded us for a while and just grunted and hissed and made these animal noises. We didn't move an inch. We never turned around. They were so close and literally right behind us, and all I could think the entire time was I'd feel a spear in my neck any second. After a while, they left, and eventually my transportation arrived. A few other Americans were in other villages and came for my pickup. I remember once I got in the car, I couldn't even speak for a while what had happened. My words and stories don't do justice to what I felt that day. I never knew darkness like that existed, but it does. Worked as a lab student in Alert, Nunavut, look it up, most northerly inhabited place in the world. I was there for my second term in January, so total darkness. The lab I worked at was an atmospheric lab, so it was far from the main base, maybe 5 km. Around the lab, there were lifelines leading to all of our instruments outside. However, on this particular Wednesday, which was Flasking Day, it was a little stormy, but nothing too serious. Since I was the student, I did all of the outside flasking. I loaded up a sleigh with evacuated flasks and would walk about 300 m from the lab, open up the flasks, and then walk back to the lab. We then would send them south for analysis. Since we had to ensure that we got the best samples, we always had to walk into the wind. That means no lifeline. It was coming from a different direction every time. On this Wednesday, I had my little headlamp, walked out, and pulled my sleigh into the darkness. The darkest dark. I was a couple 100 meters out and everything went dark. I turned around. The lab was gone. The station was gone. Where we parked our truck was gone. I was alone with only a headlamp and a sleigh of empty glass flasks. I panicked. I had no radio, no phone, not that they work up there anyway, and no clue where anything was. The wind was strong enough that I couldn't even find my tracks. I accept my fate and just stay put, heart racing. This was it. This was how I die. After the longest 2 minutes of my life, the power comes back on. I used to work overnight as a dispatcher system monitoring. Most days we had 2 people per shift. Pretty much the only reason we wouldn't would be if someone was sick or something. Most nights were completely uneventful, and I basically did nothing for 8 hours. One night around 1 a.m., I hear screaming like some girl is getting murdered. My coworker and I both start checking cameras. Nothing. I grab my radio and start running through the building to find this girl. I run down to the first floor before I realize it's coming for the back parking lot. I exit the building expecting to have to fight someone with a knife or see a rape or some SH*T. What I actually find is a girl alone in her car just screaming and crying. I find out she just wanted to vent and was seriously okay. She thought no one would be in the office park at 1 a.m. I promptly tell her to knock it off as it was absolutely terrifyingly and to please leave. So not really that scary / creepy / strange at the end of it all, but it was absolutely the worst 2 minutes of my life as I was trying to find the screaming. I worked as a night security guard at a couple's property. On Christmas night, everyone left. There was no one here, so I decided that it would be a very easy shift. There were several huge warehouses on the premises, and while walking around, I suddenly discovered that the door to one of them was open, which was very strange. I entered this door to check why it was not closed. The lights in the building were powered by motion sensors and only burned in the place where someone was. So I walked through the warehouse, and as I walked, the lights in front of me came on and behind me went out. Suddenly I saw that a light was burning at a distance of 250, 300 meters from me. The next light comes on. Next. The light switched as if someone was moving towards me, but there was definitely no one in the light of the lamps. I looked at this movement of light in my direction for several seconds, but then I got scared and ran outside. I never knew what it was, but it was very, very strange. At that time, I was working as a wardrobe attendant in a nightclub. There were several shops above the club, and opposite there was a multi-story car park, which was very clearly visible from where I was. After about a week of work, around 1 in the morning, I just sat and looked at this parking lot because no one came or went and I had no work. And then I noticed that a man was flying from the top floor of the parking lot. I jumped up and ran out into the street, but I never found the body. Since then, I have seen this at least once a week. A body falls from the roof of a parking lot and disappears before reaching the ground. This happened so often that I perfectly remembered what it looked like and what it was wearing. But when I asked my colleagues about it, everyone said that they had never seen or heard anything like it. I looked through the camera footage, but there was no falling body on it. I tried to find information about people who died in this place, but I couldn't find anything similar. Perhaps it's just my imagination, but I see it so clearly. I was a sailor on a cargo ship. We were sailing across the Indian Ocean. One night on my shift, the radar detected an object directly ahead. We tried to see it, but could not, although the ocean was absolutely quiet and the moon was shining. About an hour later, the radar again detected an object directly ahead. We did not see anything like that ahead and called the captain. He ordered to change course so as not to collide with this, albeit invisible, object. At this moment, the object also changed direction so that a collision was inevitable. Both radars displayed the ship's name and call sign. We tried to establish contact with him by radio but received no response. When, according to the radars, the ship was as close as possible, it was quite obvious to us that there was nothing above the water. When the radar dot collided with us, nothing happened. At the port, we carefully checked all the radars, but they were working. Last year, I worked as a night watchman in a hotel, 8 floors, 104 rooms directly overlooking the ocean. The hotel was badly damaged by the hurricane and was closed for 3 months, but they kept my work shifts, just adding some other work for me. One day I was walking around the building to check that all the doors were closed, etc., listening to music as usual, but suddenly something made me pause it. And then I heard a woman's voice performing opera. It lasted a few seconds and then died down. The voice was completely different from what I was listening to, so it couldn't have been an echo from my headphones. I never heard this singing again, but when I remember it, I feel uneasy. One day I was working the night shift. I finished everything early. There was no way to leave, so I decided to watch The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Turned it on the phone, with headphones. And about 45 minutes later, as the film reached its most terrifying climax, the lights on the entire floor suddenly went out. Needless to say, I almost shit myself. It turned out that I was just sitting very calmly. The motion sensors did not detect me, and the light went out. When I was in college, I worked at night as a salesperson in a pharmacy. Absolutely every night, a man would come to us, choose a nail polish, approach the saleswoman and offer to give her this polish if she agreed to go with him to his hotel room and allow him to watch her paint her nails. Management didn't do anything about it. As far as I know, he continues to come to this day. I work at night at a hotel, and a lot of strange and inexplicable things have happened to me during this time. It always started after we closed all the hotel doors. I saw closet doors open on their own, heard footsteps in a place where no one was, and was constantly haunted by the feeling that I was being watched. One day I was washing my hands and heard the paper towel dispenser start working behind me. It works by moving your hand next to it, but at that moment I was standing quite far away. I turned around and saw this machine dispense a towel. It swung up and then slowly fell. There was nothing near me that could direct the flow of air onto the towel. I work at night in a taxi office. The building is very old. Next to it there is a garage where the mechanics work. They say that the previous manager hanged himself there, and although I have never seen direct evidence, I 100% believe it. This happens all the time. The kettle and microwave turn on by themselves. The clock fell from the wall several times. The hand dryer in the toilet starts working when I'm in the office, and no one else is around. One day I was sitting in my office and working. Through the open door I could see the corridor, which was tiled. Suddenly I heard a loud, growing sound, looked out from behind the monitor, and saw a silver ball rolling down the corridor towards my office. I just picked it up and put it in my pocket, never knowing what it was. I've worked in healthcare for over 20 years now, and I have a couple from working in nursing homes of seeing the figure in black shooting across the hall, and then in the next 24 hours a resident will die, and then in less than a week another one will pass as well. But my favorite story is this. I worked at a very small hospital, maybe 30 beds. It has been around for many years. In the basement is, of course, the old morgue, and there is one elevator that goes from the basement to the main floor outside the nurses' station. This elevator would come up in the middle of the night randomly, and the doors would open and all the staff would get up to go find the patient who just passed away. One night my co-workers and I were sitting at the nurses' station, and down the short hall to our right we hear this TV come on, and the volume is up as loud as it can go. One of my CWs and I walked down said hall to find the TV to turn it down. There is one room down that hall that maintenance has the door closed and do not enter signs on the door. After looking in all the open rooms, there is no other room but the closed one to look in. We open the door. There is nothing in this room except the TV. I walked in, turned the TV, and said, "Stop that. There is a sick baby next door who needs to sleep, so please be quiet." I walked out and closed the door with no further incidents with the TV. This isn't scary, but it haunts me more than anything. I had a young mother come into labor and delivery for a scheduled CS for triplets at 33 weeks. As a PGY2, I was doing her H&P and ultrasound for fetal position. She was super squirrely and nervous, so I asked her if there was anything I could do to help allay her concerns. She told me they had warned her of all these terrible things that would happen to her with a multiple pregnancy, and none had. Heck, she'd been mall walking yesterday, and the babies were all projected to be over 4 pounds, hence the CS now. Then she said, "I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop." I tried to reassure her that everything looked great. Her CS did go well, and all 3 babies were big. I rounded on her that next morning and went off service. I even told her that, she hadn't anything to worry about. She died the next day from acute cardiac decomposition in a helicopter on the way to another hospital trying to get a heart transplant. She, apparently, had been developing dilated cardiomyopathy, and the uterus pressing on her SVC was keeping her compensated. The delivery killed her. She knew. Somehow, she just knew. That bothers me more than any ghosts.